Good to go.
Got it.
Good evening, everybody, and greetings. I'm Georgette Mayo of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture, and I am your moderator tonight for the Dr. Conseula Francis Reading Circle, and we will be discussing it a little bit, Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick by Zora Neale Hurston. But before we start, we have a guest that is going to do a public service announcement representing Reading Partners, Miss Victoria Felder. Go on, Miss Felder.
Thank you, Ms. Mayo. Hi, guys, everyone. Really glad to be here this evening. My name is Victoria Felder, and I am the new Community Engagement Associate for Reading Partners. And I see familiar names and or faces of folks who are volunteers with our organization. Reading in general holds a very dear place and space in my heart. Huge lover of books, and some of my favorite authors included both Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston, whom my very own daughter is named after, Zora. So that's something that both Ms. Mayo and I share. Daughter is named Zora after Zora Neale Hurston, who we're going to be discussing tonight. So really quickly, I did want to kind of share in this space. Reading Partners has been around for several years in the Charleston community. It is affiliated with our national organization where we have various different chapters in several cities in our country. And there is a huge need for volunteers. What we currently offer is one-to-one literacy instruction with students. And at this present time, in the midst of all that's been going on in our country, the learning loss has been extremely great. And so we were able to create a virtual platform, and we'd like to kind of get the word out about what that looks like. So I am available for information sessions. I'm available for one-on-ones. In the event that you want to participate and become a volunteer with our organization, my information is victoria.felder@readingpartners.org. Again, that's victoria.felder@readingpartners.org if you're interested. Or I can actually partner with Ms. Mayo at a later time if you guys want to express any interest through her. I greatly appreciate having a moment to be able to kind of make that announcement. Yeah, I certainly can drop that information in the chat if that's allowed. Ms. Mayo, may I will put that in there, but just a brief notion. We have just a huge push right now with promoting literacy and educational equity here in our community. And I thought that the fine folks who are joining this link and live tonight should know about it. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Felder. And yes, by all means, do put your contact information in the chat. And thank you for participating. Well, tonight we are going to discuss the infamous, the prolific Zora Neale Hurston, novelist, folklorist, anthropologist, dramatist. I'm briefly going to discuss her life, very briefly, because I think everybody here knows about Zora Neale Hurston. She was born in Eatonville, Florida. In fact, she actually put Eatonville on the map. Her father, who is shown in her writings as Joe Clark, was the mayor and pastor of Macedonian Missionary Baptist Church. Her life experiences, unfettered by racism, typical of most Southern cities, provided her with the confidence to use her own life and lives of those around her as her blueprint for her work, celebrating Black culture and tradition. After attending Howard University and co-founding the university's student newspaper, The Hilltop, she graduated from Barnard College with a BA in anthropology. Between the mid to late 1930s, Hurston published 5 works, beginning with her first published work in 1934, Jonah's Gourd Vine. After being awarded the Guggenheim Fellowship to study in Haiti. Hurston published her most renowned novel in 1937, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Hurston was able to bring to light larger inequities experienced by African Americans through her focus on nuances of courtship, marriage, relationships in mostly rural and also urban settings in Harlem. To give a little bit more context to Zora Neale Hurston, please allow me to discuss very briefly the time period in which she was writing. It was known as the period of the Harlem Renaissance and also the time of the New Negro. Zora was an outliner among prolific writers known as Jean Toomer, Claude McKay, County Cullen. Oh, I'm experiencing can everybody hear me clearly? I heard an echo.
If everyone can make sure that they stay muted, that will help us not have any additional small interruptions.
Okay, thank you. W.E.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, and Elaine Locke, to mention a few. But there were few women, and I'm just going to mention some of them. Jessie Redmond Fassett, who was a literary editor of The Crisis. Gwendolyn Bennett, who wrote for The Opportunity. And Dorothy West, writer of short stories, who really didn't become famous until after the Harlem Renaissance period in the late 1930s with The Living is Easy. And it wasn't until her death that the book, The Wedding, came out. I think that came out in the 1990s, which focused on upper middle class families. And I think and of course, Nella Larson, which we saw her, many of us saw her movie adaptation of Passing, and she also wrote Quicksand. And I mentioned these women because there's not that many women during this time period that were prolific. And it really wasn't until Zora's death that Alice Walker really brought her into fame and notoriety within, demanding that she be part of the canon of literary writers. One thing that I want to mention was, I had briefly mentioned the topic of the New Negro. And of course, this was more male-centered. I'm going to hold up this book. And this is a reproduction of the graphics, survey graphic, Harlem, Mecca of the New Negro. There were many male writers in this journal, among them Elaine Locke and Jean Toomer and Claude McKay. There was only one woman, Elsa Johnson McDougall, who wrote about the double task, the struggle of the Negro woman for sex and race emancipation. And even though the title seemed focused on, it is more so on gender and the virtues of the African-American woman, she was the only female voice in this journal. Again, I will note that Zora Neale Hurston was an outliner because she did not write about middle-class African-Americans. She wrote about who she knew and how she grew, and mainly how she grew up. Again, in Edenville, Florida, and the people that were in her community. And I think that she felt most comfortable doing this. And which was really against the New Negro, which was more geared towards up and coming African-Americans, New Thought, middle class, and which was to counter stereotypes. And many might say that Zora wrote about stereotypes, but on further thought and readings, no, she didn't. She was a folklorist, she was an anthropologist, she told stories, and we're going to delve into those right now. And since there's 21 stories in Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick, I'm going to give everybody the reader's choice. You could either put in the chat. I think it would be most convenient, I guess, to type in the chat. I would really like to focus on 4 or 5 stories, whether they be long or short. Some of them can be combined, like the one with the She-Rock and the Country Woman. I'm not saying the title right. I know, but the Country and the Woman, those can be combined. So go ahead and put in the chat which ones that you'd like to discuss. And first come, first serve. So don't be shy. Put your request in. I do have one from my Zora, who is my daughter, Zora Mayo. The Conversation of Sam. Anybody else? And while we're waiting, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up. I did promise, I did mention that there will be a wonderful free gift. And I will discuss that, or we will discuss that later on, just before we close before 7:30. So stick around, and we're taking names of everybody in attendance, and everybody in attendance will be receiving a free book. But I'm not going to tell you what it is until the end of our discussion. So I have 2 requests so far. The conversation, it's a conversion of Sam. I read The Conversation, and Sweat. No problem, Zora. Okay. So to start off with The Conversion of Sam, and just a primer, it says, who is a central character? And Sam is introduced to us as an extreme loafer. And I'd like to discuss what aspects of the story might you have taken up with, some things that you might have objected to. Do you feel strongly about the character?
Well, I loved Sam's character. I loved that he fell in love with Stella and was willing to become a better man for Stella. And I love the help that he received from his boss. It was one of the few stories where there was white characters, and I found that interesting, and the roles that they played. I also really appreciated the jealousy aspect, because I feel like that is still present in today's society. There's a lot of the inability to come up in, I feel, maybe your peers don't want to see you really succeed without them. That jealousy there, I really appreciated that. And I loved that there was a redemption at the end, and that Sam wasn't so prideful that he was willing to beg for his job back, and that it worked, that there was a happy ending. Not all of these stories have a happy ending, and I don't always have to hear a happy ending, but I really appreciated this one.
And what did you and everybody else think about Stella?
Oh, I
You
thought
think she was too naive?
maybe, sure, but I don't think it ruined her in a sense. I don't think that the only bad thing that happened to her was she got hit by a car, unfortunately, but she didn't lose her love, you know. I think it's her naivete that kind of saved him. Or I don't know, it was her faith in him that, allowed him to continue to come back to her, to convert for her, or so have you, to become a better man for her.
And you briefly mentioned his Sam's employer, Mr. Bonner.
Yes.
And it's an open conversation, everybody. So please feel free to chime in. What did you think about his character?
I didn't love him, in a sense that like he was your stereotypical owner without post-slavery, I guess. He definitely saw Sam as not an equal. I think there was a part in the story where he said, "I treated you like you were white." And I felt like there was a lot of power play. Like the owner had the opportunity to take his job away and give it back. It was all in his hands. And I liked how Zora put that, because at the end of the day, it's oftentimes not even in the main character's own hands. It's the judgment of another person, and at that time period, the judgment of a white person's of white perception. But he wasn't. I feel like the owner was also kind, showed kindness, really wanted something good for him. And also, I guess, in a way, I don't know if this is the right word, but showed mercy in allowing him to try again.
I think this story lends itself to a lot of class structure, you could see the class divisions.
Mm-hmm.
Because his employer didn't want him to live in the neighborhood that he used to hang out in. He wanted better for him and his wife. But I also look at it like this, the owner of the restaurant, Jim, and his wife, and then the professor. I see that Zora is using the characters that probably, even though this is set in the city, that these are characters that could be very well in Eatonville. And anybody else would like to chime in and discuss the character structure of the conversion of Sam? Come on, everybody. We had 20 people in this room, and I don't want everybody to be shy. If you're shy, you can put your answers in the chat.
Yeah.
I just was intrigued because this was the first time I read the story, and it was intriguing because I could tell in many ways that was an earlier work of Zora Neale Hurston. There was more explication, than normally in her later works. A little less dialogue. And, so that was intriguing also in terms of the language, the terms, more use of what we might consider derogatory references, like, using the N-word than in some later works. So, I could see her evolution as a writer in this short story, as well as you mentioned the evolution of Sam as a character and how we see him become a rounded character or a dynamic character. And I saw that same kind of evolution in Zora Neale Hurston as a writer. So that was one of the reasons why I was glad you drew our attention to this short story. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. Anybody else? I'd like to make a suggestion in regards to this short story and a comparison of the story Mutsy. And I hope some of our attendees are familiar with the short story Mutsy. that was also in this book. We have a gambler, which Sam also was. And he's fallen from this young woman, Pinky Jones from Eatonville. Again, that, you know, that back home reference. And he's known as, you know, basically the best gambler in town. And it would have to take a, you know, a mighty strong person or woman to sway him away from what he was, you know, from the ills of his gambling. And I thought a lot about, you know, the conversion of Sam and that character. And, you know, in comparison, there's a woman that's involved. But the woman doesn't, in this case, the woman at first does not want him. You know, at first I think she's sort of admired by him, but when she realizes, you know, who he truly is, it's like, no, I don't think so. So does anybody else have any thoughts about Mutsy?
Yeah, I personally feel like Mutsy could have been Sam, but I feel like his love interest lacked the faith in him, failed to supply any sort of encouragement, failed to acknowledge the changes that he was making, unlike Sam's love interest. And I think that's so important because it is very hard to change. And it's also not natural. And you need support. And if you're going to change for a person, even if it's changing for the better, you need to get some sort of validation. And Mutsy, instead of validation, his love interest ran away and he had to go find her. And so, of course, he went back to gambling, in my opinion, of course. I say, of course, in my opinion, because he put his heart out and it wasn't received well. Unlike in Sam's condition. Sam's love interest, she supported him, believed in him, was worried for him, trusted him. We didn't see that at all in Mutsy's story.
And I don't know about you, but I got the impression that he was swayed by, I think it was Blue Front towards the very end. I mean, he got his woman, he got Pinky Jones finally to come around. But I got the impression that he hooked up with Blue Front and wanted to gain his stature again as a gambler.
I think that the fact that Mutsy was admired by so many women also did play a role too, because it was Mutsy who made a choice in pursuing Pinky, whereas Sam, he might have felt very lucky to have his love interest instead. And maybe that does play a role. Maybe he felt like he really did have something to lose there as well.
Anybody else want to comment on either story, the conversion of Sam and Mutsy, and maybe counter what we're saying is seeing, you know, similarities?
I could be wrong, guys. I mean, I could be way off base.
We all could be.
Yeah. I'm just shooting out stuff.
Anybody else? Don't be shy. Well, let's go to Dr. Frazier's suggestion of speaking about sweat. The dynamic is changed a lot here We have a hard working woman, Delia Jones, and her abuser husband, Sykes. And anybody want to elaborate on the story? Well, the bottom line, she's a washerwoman, and she works very hard doing what she's doing to provide for both her and her husband. And he just seems to not want to work. He just wants to hang around and live off of his wife's labor and share those funds with other women.
Mhm. Yes, yes. I guess I can contribute since I suggested the story, which is one of my favorites. I noticed the parallels to the Garden of Eden. You know, I think that's one of the striking kind of notes that we see in the story. We could identify an Adam figure, an Eve figure. Perhaps the townspeople might serve as godlike or oracles because they give the background as to the relationship between Delia and Sykes before it turned sour. So, I find, and then of course we have the snake as a major player, which singles in many aspects the Garden of Eden story and the introduction of sin into the world. So, and also we have the character, and you mentioned Bertha as well earlier, as the interloper in the marriage. So, I find it very appealing. And, thinking about when the story was written, 1926, this is one of the few stories that we have actually published during the Harlem Renaissance, because a lot of her works published later. So, we see how, her fame kind of in many ways then comes from short stories such as Sweat.
I never made that distinction between Adam and Eve and the snake. I was like, why a snake? Why a snake? So I really
yeah. And then you think about the work ethic as well, because once the sin was, a dynamic in the story, then Adam was condemned to work, to labor, right? Just like we have Delia working all the time. So some people reading the story can argue that she's more Adam-like, that she takes on masculine kind of traits, while then Sykes might be feminized because he then is relegated to, just trying to plot in the background to try to get access to and control over the house. Because, one of the backstories is that he's unable to get a job because of discrimination. So to some that might yield it, or, at least make him more sympathetic, maybe a little bit, because he is oppressed as well. And sometimes he makes insightful statements like his critique of Delia, because she sweats and works on Sunday and yet claims to be such, a religious woman. So when I teach this story a lot, and so it's oftentimes interesting to kind of then, play with the Garden of Eden theme, but also kind of, try to redeem Sykes a little bit, because, he can be humanized. I think we see that through the story that the, townsfolk on the porch tell, and then also in the end when he calls for Delia.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. It's wonderful to have an English professor joining in on our discussion. I definitely appreciate
That story
it.
is interesting.
I'm sorry to blow your cover, but it's so true.
Another story that really intrigued me was Under the Bridge, for I think very obvious reasons, because it was a love triangle. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I would like to mention there's a huge age difference between the wife and the husband. And then there's a son who is closer in age to the wife. So I'm just going to drop that and leave it open for discussion.
And I think the part that really intrigued me was the fact that the love triangle really was more so of an emotional affair between the son and the wife, the two that were closer in age, and the fact that they both loved their father, and that there was a lot of just maybe like jealousy or so with about the older man, the husband, maybe rightfully so, but I feel like it was brought on because of his own actions, I felt. But that he failed to see that they both just loved him so much. I thought that was just so intriguing. And it also didn't go at all the way that I thought that it would, in the sense that it was way more of an emotional connection than it was any sort of like infatuation or romantic. It was the fact that they could relate to each other. And I think that life experiences, I think people talk about ageism a lot, and the youth versus older generations versus younger generations, and some people say age doesn't matter, and I think that to a certain degree
This is Zora. Did you hear from Joey Johnson?
Please mute your mic, please, if you're not speaking. Thank you.
But I think that life experience only can happen with time. Well, in part with time. And I think that the reason why the wife and the son were able to connect was because in part because they were younger and they were experiencing a lot through their age, through their youthfulness. And I thought that was very interesting. They saw the world in similar ways, and they had the same type of love for their father, or for father/husband. And I found that very intriguing.
I would echo what Zora's saying in that scene where both of them give Angie gifts. It was pretty clear that the younger man, I'm sorry, Artie, I think his name was, had a better take on what Vanjie would like, the dress, the skirt and the blouse. And I felt a little sad for Luke, because he was trying and he clearly loved his wife, but he just kind of hit and miss on that. He didn't quite get it. Yeah, I felt bad for him in the story.
Yeah.
Would that be something that you would expect from a younger woman that's married to an older man? I mean, he was in, I'm going to bring it up again. He was, in comparison to her, 19 years. I think he was like in his late 40s, early 50s.
Well, I think it's first so important that we note that it is not uncommon for an age discrepancy for that gender to get married, especially at that time.
Excellent point.
And I think it's also really important to note that I think the most common sort of affair that would occur would be, the wife choosing a younger man because he's spry and lively, and that's not at all what she was seeking out of the son. It was a very emotional connection, and I thought that's what drew me to the narrative, really.
And that's interesting because then we can see some foreshadowing of maybe their eyes were watching God. When we think about the male suitors.
Yeah.
Such as Jody or Killins or Killix or, later Tea Cake.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, tea cake. Oh, tea cake.
Okay, I'm checking the chat to make sure that I'm not missing anybody in regards to their requests on which short story that we want to talk about. One that's not an old story, it's been published along with Sweat, is drenched in light. And to me, this little girl reminds me so much. And I think I think this is Zora when she was young, because I had read that she would just wait at the signpost and watch people travel between, where she was living, in between, I think she was in between Orlando and another town. I want to say Jacksonville, I'm not sure. So I can see her being rambunctious. I can see that relationship with the older grandmother who's very strict and, keep them legs together. And because I had a grandmother like that.
Me too.
So I can definitely see this as Zora. And I might be pushing it a little bit too, but I also see the white woman that wants to give her money as the future benefactor of Zora. And her name is, let me pull it out. Y'all should see my table. My table is full of books. I have this book.
Are you thinking about Charlotte Osgood Mason? Are you thinking about Charlotte Osgood?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Osgood Mason. It says, a wealthy white patron of the arts supported the work of both Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston. So maybe it's a reach, but that's where my mind is going.
I loved that this narrative discussed gender roles, in the slightest of ways, because, the main character had to keep her legs closed, was the only one who had to do the dishes. But she pushed back against it by trying to shape her grandmother's, like chin hair, because it's like, what is this? What are we doing here? Why can't I just do what I want? Oh, I could relate to that so much. Oh my goodness.
I know you can, Zora. Speaking from a mother to a daughter. Anybody else have you read Drenched in the Light, and what are your comments? I mean, it was a real short story, and as I said, it wasn't one of the lost stories. It's been published. It's been out for a while. So it just as I said, it just reminds me of the essence of Zora when she was young.
I didn't know about that aspect of it, so that definitely adds to the narrative for me.
And I think this is a question. It says, how would you raise a free child when you have never known freedom? Thinking of the grandmother, and you live in a world where life is dangerous and hard for Black adults and children. So that's another aspect to think about too. The grandmother is, may be strict, but she's strict for a reason.
Yeah, so we can't really fault her. She's doing what she knows, which again reminds me of Their Eyes Were Watching God, and what was instilled on, because she was just doing what she knew. They were pushing marriage on the main character because it was what they knew, and they just wanted a good life for, oh man. Love it.
I guess I was struck in this story by, the little girl Isis just sort of hops in a car with two white people, random, white people. The man, I think, never even gets a face or a name. And I mean, to me, it's kind of horrifying to think of your child just like heading off to Orlando or to a hotel or whatever with two strange white people. So again, putting it in, perspective of the time and the power relations and all of that, but I don't know. As a mom, it kind of, Ouch.
Well, I know this is a little touchy, but in some people's minds, some Black people's minds, white people could do no wrong. We see that today, but back then, that superiority complex. So it was, the aspect of probably getting some money and, oh, these must be good white people because they're tolerating my granddaughter, and so
Mhm.
a lot of hidden things
Mhm.
discussing that.
Yeah.
And not saying that it's right, because it's not. So we'll put that disclaimer out there too.
How far was Orlando from Eatonville? Do you happen to know? Is Eatonville, because Orlando comes up in several stories.
Right. Yeah, because Orlando was a major city.
So
Eatonville
driving distance
was very small, but I'd have to look that up. But I don't think it was that far.
Mm-hmm. Just
And in
curious.
fact, as a little diversion, Miss Rambo had sent me a link to the Zora Neale Hurston Museum. There's a museum in Eatonville that's dedicated to her, and they are currently doing a Afrofuturism in the visual realm exhibit, a take off of Jack Kirby and comic books. Jack Kirby was a prolific comic book writer, but they're now highlighting a person named Black Kirby.
Uh-huh. And to answer your question, Pam, Eatonville is only 6.4 miles away from Orlando. So it's just like a day's walk.
Thank you, Zora.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving right along, unless anybody else had something to say about Drenched in Light. Now, let's see. Any other suggestions of short stories that we want to talk about?
I have an observation I wanted to share that doesn't relate to one specific story. Although I was going to reference John Redding Goes to Sea, and then the other story, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's the one where the river tells the story to the brook, almost like an adult to a child.
The Magnolia.
Magnolia flower, is that what you
Right.
were thinking? Okay, sorry, I just couldn't. Yep, that's it. I was really struck by the beautiful descriptions, Hurston's descriptions of the nature, the flowers in those two stories. They were really gorgeous scene setting. And I conversely noticed that when she sets her stories in an urban landscape, you really don't get a lot of description of the setting, which was just something that struck me.
I didn't notice that. That's a great observation, I think.
It is. That's one of the things that I love about Zora Neale Hurston is her description of landscapes. She just those words just flow, and I mean you can envision what's on the page and into reality. She was definitely prolific in regards to describing certain scenes. But yeah, it's like I don't think that getting back to urban versus rural, she definitely had a love for Eatonville, her home. and the everyday people. Harlem, I think that she was there. She was an anthropologist. I mean, another story when she was in college, she used to stand on the street corner and ask people, could she measure their skulls for her anthropology. So, I mean, she's definitely coming at it as a scientist also. But I think with Harlem, all that's gold is not real, which leads me to another noted story, the Gilded Six bit. And the Gilded Six bits, which was written in 1933 and examines the relationships between men and women, and how money or the aspect of a perceived fortune could break up a couple. Does anybody want to talk about that? Okay, the story is a couple, Joe and Missy Mae Banks, and a city slicker, Otis D. Simmons, who was noted to be funded by white women, and they would supposedly give him pieces of gold, or so the story goes. And Missy knew that her husband was interested in obtaining some gold, and she's trying to convince him, well, we could find some, you never know, somebody might have dropped some money or some gold on the road, and they'd never miss it because it's just it's lost on the road. So but Joe secretly would like to have a fortune, and he's somewhat envious of Otis, and Missy knows this. And so something happens between the city slicker, Otis, and Missy Mae. And what happens is most likely could break up their marriage. But the bottom line is that it comes to find out that what was obtained when Joe found Missy with Otis is that in a tussle, he obtained a gold coin that was in his hand and wrestled with him. While Otis was trying to escape, Joe wound up having it, and it comes to find out that it's not really gold.
Yeah.
It's gold plated.
I thought that the most interesting aspect of that story was really the end with the shopkeeper who was just made the comment about Negroes, always laughing, always being loud and laughing, and just everything that Joe went through. It's just like, oh God, this man has no idea what he's talking about, which breaks that stereotype in that sense of they just don't get it. There's just that whole world that they fail to see. And that also goes with the laughing, like it's a common ideology that African Americans like laugh through their pain, laugh instead of cry. Because if you didn't laugh, you'd be crying. But it's just also the common stereotype that Black people are always laughing, they're always really loud. And that story I think the ending really encapsulated that for me.
It it kind of interestingly, I don't know if you, I remember a story that we used to read in high school called The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry, like around 1905. So it
Henry.
resonated with me. Like there were some parallels there with the idea of sacrifice and the couple loving each other, but somehow, you know, there are some obstacles in their way that by the end they're able to work out.
I found that so interesting too, how they were able to work that out, because I guess I just didn't understand the wife's intentions completely. Was she there? Was it lust? Was it her taking his money? Was it for the family? I was just a little lost on that one. And I guess Zora left it for the reader's interpretation, maybe.
Yeah, because she wasn't certain. It's like, oh no, it's like, I think in the back of her mind that she was saying that, you know, she basically blew it, and that, you know, I'm going to be losing a good man, and you know, he just needed some time to sort of think about things, and
Yeah.
But I'm quite sure that they, you know, they loved each other, and so this was one of those stories that, you know, love endures. And I think this was a good segue, Zora, when you had mentioned the white shopkeeper saying, you know, those Negroes, they're always laughing. Zora they've just published a new book. The editor that edited this book, Genevieve West and Henry Louis Gates, has just come out with a book of more essays of Zora, not short stories, but actual essays that have been published in magazines and newspapers. And the title is "You Don't Know Us Negroes" and other essays. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't either. It just came out while I was doing the research of this. So that was the thing. Question. What do you think of the title, "Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick"?
Well,
And this is open to everybody. Just let's hold on, Zora. Let's hold on. Let's see if this is an open question to everybody. I want other people to respond to this. What do you think hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick means? Hello, anybody?
Well, I'll be the first to admit I had no idea what the meaning meant. I had to look it up. So I just want to throw that one out there. I didn't know.
Okay, I'm getting ready to play the Jeopardy theme song.
Oh,
And we all know how that goes. So y'all don't want me to do that.
okay. I apologize to everybody. I'm not exactly here, but anyway, the title. First of all, let's acknowledge that Zora Neale, in addition to everything else, had a tremendous satiric wit, and sometimes it's British, and sometimes it's straight up Eatonville, Florida colored humor. But for the most part, she has a good sense of humor, and often inside of the riddle is a profound statement. And my first interpretation, I think there are many possibilities, but the one that made sense to me was, in order to do the right thing, to get the best result, to reach your goal, you don't have to have the perfect equipment or tools. And so it's possible to get where you want to go without having the most expensive putter, the Porsche car, you can still do it. So don't let that be a handicap, but also the fact that it rhymes, and a great deal of folklore, Black folklore is rhythmic and rhymes. Obviously, one of the reasons that rap is so popular, that kind of thematic genre thing has come with us a very long way and over many years. So I think she was doing a good, she was being her usual, not only chronicling who we are and how we behave, she was also pushing us to look at it and to love it.
Thank you, Miss Rambo. Now, Zora, you said that you looked it up.
I did. I can't tell you what it says verbatim, but I think Miss Rambo kind of said it perfectly. I also found it to be like, by any means necessary. That's what, like, I also thought of it as, you aren't always given the tools to get a job done. You aren't always given the privileges to succeed in life, to do what you want to do necessarily. But I think that the African-American race is amazing in that we're very resourceful, and we've, through history, found ways to get the job done in a very remarkable way. That's I think my definition.
Okay. Very quickly, the full phrase is, God can hit a straight lick with a crooked stick, is an idiomatic expression that grew from an original English clergyman in the mid 15th century. And it has two meanings. I'm just going to read the American English: overcoming inherent difficulties of self and your environment and doing extraordinary things. And that gives us a wonderful segue. If 19 people have lasted during our conversation of our short stories on Zora Neale Hurston, I thank you very much, and for your participation or lack thereof. But anyway, for actually being here. I see you, Zora. I know, I went there, I'm sorry. We will be giving to everybody that sends me an email so I can send you this actual book called Promise. It's next month, February's reading by Regina E. Williams. And in fact, Miss Williams is in the audience. If she could unmute her mic and say hello to the group and say a couple of words. It's a book. I hope she'll elaborate a little bit. It's the short stories on life experiences and ultimately trusting oneself. So if Miss Williams, please unmute yourself and say greetings to our group.
Hello, it's really wonderful to be here and to hear the discussion. I'm hoping that you will find a lot to relate to in these stories. They cover a lot of territory. They cover the time frame from 1955 until the present. There is everything from very simple. One of my favorite things to do is flash fiction. And there are quite a few flash fiction pieces in this book. Part of the focus was that I'm originally from New York, and I figured that people needed to be able to read at least one whole story between subway stops. So I began to write flash fiction. Anyway, I'm looking forward to being present with you all and hearing your comments on what you read. I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I'm so glad that you were able to join us tonight. And we definitely look forward to reading your book and discussing it next month. And I put my name and my email address in the chat. Please take it down and contact me so you can get a free copy of next month's book by Miss Regina E. Williams. So we look forward to seeing everybody. And this was a wonderful crowd, even though y'all were a little quiet. But we were glad that you were here, and we definitely appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Until then, and there's a storm warning for this weekend, so please, everybody, be safe. I mean, we've got enough to contend with Rona still raging out there. So, please be careful. And we want to see you here next month, safe and sound. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday to the birthday ladies.
And yes, forgot, happy birthday, Zora Neale Hurston, Zora Mayo, and Ms. Ruth Rambo. And we hope you feel better, Miss Rambo.
Yes. Mhm.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.